A 1, 2, 3. Private parts. Feed the crave. And all her friends talking about the things that doctors rarely say.
Welcome everyone to Private Parts. I'm here with Zak Pidd, who is a very, very, very old friend of mine.
Very old.
I think we met at the back alley of the Evelyn when I was like 15 and you were a rock star and I was in love with you and all of your friends. So that's the context for the viewers.
Yes.
I'm sure there's a few of our viewers who know you for the same reason.
Well, I did spend a lot of time in alleys.
No, on stages. Not just in alleys.
I really peaked young. I peaked at a young age.
So we're here to talk about what's been happening with you for the last few years. Do you want to tell us what's up?
Yeah, okay. I have a chronic illness called Crohn's disease that is in the family of inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's going to take me a sec to not talk like I'm getting interviewed.
Oh, you can do whatever you feel is comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, I got Crohn's.
Yeah.
I had about 4 years ago. I got diagnosed.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk? So I'll talk about what it is.
Yeah, maybe give us a bit of what it is, technical diagnosis, and then how it looks for you.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I have Crohn's disease, which is a part of the. It's a very self-explanatory thing called inflammatory bowel disease, which is essentially what it says on the cover. But it's a funny little mystery too, because it's a chronic illness and it's immune system based. It's very hard to kind of pin down an exact explanation. At least it has been for me. Even kind of trying not to sound like trying to figure out a way to talk about it for this was really hard.
Yeah.
Essentially, most places say it's an inflammation of your gastrointestinal tract, which is your bowels and your intestines, but it's all the way through, so it's your throat as well and your colon. And so Crohn's disease is, but yeah, okay, I'll get more so what I've managed to piece together through 4 years of talking to various people that have been frustratingly aloof is your immune system being overactive and being a little bit confused about what's going on, and so is attacking my body in an attempt to get rid of something that isn't there. So the analogy that I've been told that's a really good one that I talk to people about is if you think about your gut like a bucket and your immune system is a tap, and what you normally a kind of regularly don't want to use language like that, but a functioning immune system without any quirks is you can just turn the tap off and it goes away. And so if say there was something wrong in my guts, my body would turn the tap on and put the appropriate amount of immune system in there, and then it would turn it off, and so then it would calm down. But my tap is leaky, and there's a few little drops that keep dropping.
Okay.
And there's a part of your immune system, I don't know, a strand of protein, however, whatever sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, you just did.
I'm so sorry. Whatever the immune system is, the beautiful, ephemeral spirit ghost that is the immune system, there's a strand of it called the tumor necrosis factor, which is, again, pretty self-explanatory, I feel.
Yeah.
It necrotizes tumors, and it's there to, if there are tumors in your guts, do its best job to get rid of them. And that bit of my immune system can't be turned off.
Yeah.
And so if my gut is a bucket and that drip keeps dripping, eventually the bucket begins to overflow.
Yeah.
And so that's the best way I can kind of put a picture to what is happening, is that my immune system is going down there and can't stop trying to get rid of something, even if there isn't something there. And so what happens, it begins to necrotize the walls of my intestines and my colon, and which causes essentially it to become an open wound all the way through. And so eating is really hard, and your body then starts to try and get rid of what is happening. And it becomes this accumulative cycle of your body going, something's wrong, get it out, but there's also something wrong, and there's something wrong and something wrong. And so it causes your everything to inflame to a point where it can become your organs shut down, and that's when they have to cut things away. And so it's, for me, that takes the form of, I mean, I think, it's the kind of understood symptoms is fatigue, diarrhea, an inability to ingest nutrients or eat anything, to intake fluid. It just becomes a war zone. Which is incredibly painful, and they don't know how to fix it. But
love that.
I know, it's so great. I love that for us. But it's this funny thing where they're like, I don't know how to stop you. We don't know how to. We know why. Like, it's this funny. How did you get to that without being able to figure out all the things before it? You've been able to isolate this one part of the immune system, but then it's like, well. And so the medication I take is like, I take 2. So the one I take every day is essentially, using the analogy of the bucket, is like putting a cup in and going slowly, emptying the bucket before it overflows and trying to like deal with it. But then I take another one that's a bit more severe that I inject, which works to isolate that one strand of immune system before it begins to overflow the bucket. Does this make sense? I'm rambling a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. You've explained more to me than anyone's explained about Crohn's. This is very helpful.
And I it's the funny thing, and I feel like a lot of us that have varying chronic things I'm also really worried that I'm saying the wrong thing, because nobody's really explained it to me. And it's a very individual, very invisible, very personal thing.
But we're not asking you.
No.
Don't worry about that. We're asking what happens with you and Crohn's. You're not a medical professional. You're just someone who lives there. Yeah.
It's a funny thing though, and I think it's something that I've experienced a lot, is the like, I guess it speaks to a sense of like imposter syndrome or something that comes with chronic illness, where it's like, I can tell if I've got a broken arm, and that's pretty basic, but I'm just kind of being told what's happening.
Yeah.
It's like,
like, oh yeah, I can feel something's wrong.
Yeah.
But I can't actually see that this has done this and
that. Yeah.
In terms of your life, you're a performer. How the hell do you do that while being chronically ill? Or how do you not do that? What's the go?
It's it's massive. It's been a huge challenge for a number of reasons, and I think, like, initially I work as a performer a lot, and I in the middle of my diagnosis, when it became unsustainable, I'd been having symptoms for a couple of years, or about a year, and would go to the GP and they're like, oh, maybe it's gastro, I don't know, and it would pass. And the first time it became unsustainable and I ended up having to go to hospital, I was in the middle of creating a show with my collaborator that we'd been working on for a year or so, and I was performing in, and we were about to begin rehearsing it. And I remember the first day of rehearsal coming in and being like, I don't know, I must have gastro or something, I can't eat anything, I feel really sick. And then the next day was like, this is worse. And it kind of kept getting worse. And then I went to emergency because I just hadn't slept in days and I couldn't eat anything and couldn't walk, and was becoming delirious with pain. And so I went to hospital, and then they were like, oh, your body's not, it's severely dehydrated because your body is not absorbing any water. So they put me on a drip and then gave me some morphine. They're like, we think it's inflammatory bowel disease. We'll put you on a waiting list. Here's 2 weeks worth of morphine. And then the next day I went back to emergency, was like, no, I think this is serious. But anyway, a digression. I then had to kind of negotiate. It was the first time in a long time where I had to negotiate this idea of like, okay, my job in this situation, in this work that I care about and is kind of everything I've been doing has been leading up to this point, has to change, because it would be not only unsafe for me to continue in this role, but it would also get in the way of the work, which has got a bunch of other people involved. It's not like a solo thing. There's a lot of people that want this to happen. So then I had to sit down and go, all right, so in what capacity can I continue? And it was almost the perfect first experience in that realm, because it was like I had a certain amount of autonomy. I wasn't working for somebody else. It was like, luckily enough, I was in a position to know and trust everybody around. And so I ended up sitting on the outside and kind of co-directing it and sound designing it and being able to be unwell while still being able to contribute. And I didn't have to use my body in that same way, because that would have been disastrous.
Yeah.
So that was a really good first foray into it. And then since then, it's kind of only gotten harder, because then what happened was, and I went out into the world as a more of an actor, especially going into roles where I was hired to be there. And so you're hired to, you're contractually obligated to have a certain role that kind of can't change in the same way, or can't be as fluid. And meeting the rigidity of those structures was super challenging. And what came out most was the realization that I needed to put a huge amount of work into undoing this huge amount of guilt that I realized I was feeling about disappointing or not being able to achieve, or not being able to complete what I was needed to complete. And I was doing a big musical, which was a great job, but it was also way bigger than anything I'd ever done. It was this massive juggernaut of a thing. And I ended up in hospital again and realized that I hadn't spoken about having Crohn's to anybody in the company, and had been sick for about a week and was in severe denial about how unwell I was. Like I was bleeding, and I hadn't eaten, and we're doing 8 show weeks. So like these massive jobs, and I was like coming on stage, doing a role, and then running down to the toilet and just like timing it and listening to the show and being like, and just sitting on the toilet, like panicking, sweating, pooing blood and all sorts of stuff. And then would run back on stage and like do the show again, and then lie down in the wings and like pass out for a second. And like, it was so full on, it was like nightmarish. And then but all of that, I just convinced myself that I was able to continue because I needed to. The desperation to not be sick was so full on, like the cognitive dissonance about how sick I was. And it got to the point where I went to the GP and told him what was going on, and he was like, "What are you doing? Go to emergency." And I'd been riding my bike around, and so I rode my bike to emergency, and like parked it out the front, and was just like, "Hey, so yeah, all this stuff's happening," and they like took me in straight away.
Yeah.
And I spent a week in hospital. So that was really interesting, and that's been really hard. And then we went on tour to China, and the same thing happened, and I hadn't learnt my lesson. And yeah, sorry, I'm jumping all over the shop because it's all still funny, nebulous moments of trauma in the midst over the past few years. Yeah, so that happened, and like the people, like the director and the people in charge of the show came and visited me in hospital, and they're like, "Cool, this is good to know." Because I called them from hospital and I was like, "Hey, I can't come in today. I've been admitted to hospital." And they're like, "What? Why?" And I was like, "Oh, I have Crohn's disease. Sorry, should have told ya. Sorry, and they were fine. And it was the thing, and I'm still negotiating, is like how much of, it's kind of hard to put into, I can't quite figure out how to put it in words, so I'm just going to talk. It's like how much of that assumed resentment towards me as a performer not being able to complete a job is my own projection, and how much of it is the system is the truth of the matter. How much was I projecting and how much actually was I experiencing? And I realized that it's not actually as simple as that, because it's not about people actively going, oh, you're sick, how dare you, which there is a lot of in the in the arts industry especially. There's so much of like, the show must go on. There's so much of this unhealthy understanding of how it's like, well, no, you're weak or you're unprofessional if you're like, you know, these stories have been like, oh yeah, I had bronchitis and I couldn't speak, but I came on and I nailed it.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh,
push through it.
Yeah, and there's a huge amount of romanticization about sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, and this assumption that every show needs to leave you completely stripped bare. And I've completely romanticized that in my own head as well. Like every show kills you or whatever, you know? And that is so, you don't realize how much of an impact that has until you meet it head on. Because it's like, it's not as, sometimes it's not as overt as, oh, you've got a thing, oh God, we shouldn't have hired you. But sometimes it is actually that bad. And that amount of resentment, everyone carries it. It's this huge amount of ableism especially in the performance industry, because it's so physical and so emotional. It's the same thing with mental illness and, you know, anxiety and all those sorts of things. You're expected to be able to push through it for the greater good, which is so dark. It's like really toxic. It's fascinating because it's and it ends up like we after that tour we went to China and have this strong like such vivid memory of, I learnt how to use the train system in Shanghai to find a hospital because I hadn't told anybody that I was having another flare-up. I was in Shanghai, like secretly Googling an English-speaking doctor.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember so clearly, like in secret, going, and I told them that I was a little bit unwell again, but I hadn't told them to the extent. Looking up the trains, getting out of my hotel like really early in the morning before I'd have seen anybody, and catching the train and like doubling over in pain on this train in Shanghai. We'd been there for 3 days in this like metropolis of the city, and just finding my way and calling my mum and just like crying, being like, oh, this is terrible. Why am I here? This is so full on. And like, yeah, finding a doctor and it all kind of working out. But this bizarre the extent I went to avoid having to overcomplicate the situation by overcomplicating mine. This like the personal, it's easier to overcomplicate your own journey. You sacrifice yourself for unnecessarily for the greater good. And I think theatre for me is a really good kind of metaphor for how a lot of people just interact with the world. You know, it's like this ecosystem that has a stringent bunch of rules that you can't quite figure out how to alter. They don't feel alterable. It feels like this really alterable. It feels like a very infallible, rigid structure that doesn't have space for those things. Yeah. I've rambled a bit, but I hope that makes sense.
Oh no, I love when you speak. If you were, there's obviously so many people out there with different chronic health issues, illnesses, diseases, to like young performers, young artists and stuff, and we talk about this a lot, work and illness and balance and things, like what if you could just give one piece of advice to young or older people dealing with this, creatives and freelancers and performers, what do you wish you knew at the beginning of this?
I think I don't want to think too hard about it because I've wondered this a lot about the kind of ways through, but I think there's something about understanding the power of ownership of those things. And it sounds a bit cliche, but it's not. So many of the problems I've faced as somebody kind of working within those fields is shame, really unnecessary shame. And it's about understanding that as a beautiful strength of like entering in the space and being like, these are aspects of me that make me whole. And there's nothing lacking. It is just the same as someone having red hair. or, you know, being a vegetarian. It's also like, this is what I can offer. And that for me was an important thing to kind of claim, because then I started being able to make work about it, and I started to realize that there was actually a huge amount of individuality in it that was super empowering and didn't get in the way of anything. Like all the songs I write about you know, being sick sometimes and stuff, and actually there's a huge amount of power. It's really powerful having those things, and it's actually really, you know, it's the beginning of the conversation of being like, cool, I'm not the one that, you know, it's the upside down system of like, the people that are able to help should be the ones that should be fluid in how they manage those spaces.
Yeah.
But so often it's the people that don't, the people that have those compromises, which I'm just refused to call it a compromise anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think it's about, if there's something you're worried about that's uncontrollable and but inherently yours, let it be yours.
Yeah.
It's beautiful little treasures. Also, real good talking points.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're obviously going to come back and talk to you about a lot of different elements of this kind of stuff. But thank you for sharing that with us.
Thanks for having me in your bed. It's really nice to talk about it. Thanks.
I'm just a little teary girl. You got me with some of those things. Big time. The shame. Guilt and shame. I think that's the most... I really feel guilt is the most painful part of all of it.
And so much of the time, so unnecessary.
Yeah.
I spent so much time. So many wasted tears.
We're all a mess. Look at us now. In bed.
In bed!